the identity conversation is so many young guys begin with this sort of sense of achievement or performance-driven identity. And I just see walking alongside of them, how can I help them see purpose and calling as part of their life? And if that includes football, if that includes soccer, great. If it's separate from soccer, great.
Welcome to the How Soccer Explains Leadership podcast, where we explore leadership principles through the lens of the beautiful game.
Welcome back to How Soccer Explains Leadership. Thanks again for being a part of the conversation. I'm Phil Dark, your host, and unfortunately, Brad Kenney is with us today, but Paul Jobson is not going to be able to join us today. Paul is he's got some other things going on, and we just decided the show must go on, and we're going to have this conversation with Brad Kenney. He is the founder. He is the executive director of Soccer Chaplains United, and a whole lot more than that. We're going to have a great conversation today. It's going to be just going over how he founded that organization, what he's doing, and a lot of the leadership lessons and other lessons he has learned along the way. So, Brad, how you doing, man?
Oh, I'm doing great. Got a little bit of a cold, but it's okay. It happens around this time of year, and it happens when you have kids. So
Yep, absolutely. I bet
bring group and school stuff back with them. So.
Totally. Yeah, my son has been, last week he was on the couch all week, missing school, and he did not like that very much because when you miss school, you also miss soccer practice, and you miss your friends, and you miss fun and all that. So the good thing was he probably watched so much TV that he's not super excited to watch TV again
There you go.
for a while. So hopefully, I don't know if that's going to actually happen, but we'll see. You can always hope, right? Brad, I just want to, as we start with all of our guests, just, briefly share your story, how you developed your passion for soccer and ministry and leadership and really how you became the chaplain for Colorado Rapids over 20 years ago. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. When I tell my soccer story, I say it's a very unassuming story. I don't have many claims to fame or much success. I grew up as a kid, born in Denver, grew up in Arizona, though, and I played AYSO soccer. I think my first team was a team through North Phoenix Baptist, and I think we were called the Saints. So I don't know if that was like a,
Nice.
pioneer foreshadowing, but yeah, I just remember our head coach was German, because I don't think many Americans back in the late 70s, early 80s knew much about soccer. And because I was one of the larger kids on the team, I did a lot of running. Not that I liked that, but I think he just thought, I need to get this kid in shape. And it never worked out. But yeah, I grew up playing soccer. I played basketball as well, kind of a multi-sport kid. And it's funny, my kids say, Dad, you're better at basketball than you are soccer. Why aren't you a basketball chaplain? But we could save that story for another time. But yeah, I had a knee injury in my senior year. I played for a small 3A school here in Colorado. I was a starting center back, and I think that knee injury kind of was the end. I didn't know it at the time that we'd talk about ends as athletes, but that was the end kind of as my, just being in that kind of a role, being in that kind of position. A couple years later, I was at Moody Bible Institute, and they had a lot of international students. And so they had open tryouts, so I thought I'd gotten in really great shape, and a lot of my friends said, you should go back out for the soccer team. And I remember I tell the story elsewhere, but I remember the coach saying, okay, I want to see you guys make some runs. And I just kind of had this blank stare in my head. Like, I went through all the coaches, all the dads that were kind of had coached me through all the years, and I was like, did anyone ever tell me to make a run? And so I realized something. I realized I really wasn't probably cut out for soccer. I went after that one tryout session, and I said, Coach, I'm a media student here at the school. How about I film the team rather than go out for the team? And he was so gracious. He's like, Brad, I think that'd be a great idea. I don't know if he was getting into trimming the roster early, but I was one of the early roster trims, and I was okay with it. I did a highlights reel for the team that year, and just the guys fell in love with me. I fell in love with them, and I had been in Chicago starting my schooling in '94, so it was right after the World Cup had been to the U.S. I feel like I missed this monumental moment, but sort of the wave of that was Major League Soccer was starting, and so while I was at Moody, some of our team went to the Chicago Fire open tryouts, and the Fire started in '98. So, yeah, that I remember that whole year of '97. They were looking for players, and so some of our guys went, and again, I was doing some stuff for the newspaper, and so I followed their story as they went through this tryout and trial sessions, and just kind of got fascinated with that. I remember when I was leaving Moody, and I thought, what kind of work do I want to do? I originally was trying to get into the film industry, but I put my resume into Major League Soccer because I thought, well, it'd be amazing to go work in media with them, for them. Things didn't work out in Chicago. The year I graduated, the AFTRA and SAG had a strike, and there was no work to be had in the film industry. So I came back to Colorado, kind of tail between my legs. I'd tried to strike out on my own, and it didn't work out. But was working in TV here in Denver, and the phone rang, and I was on a lunch break, and on the other end was this guy who worked for the Colorado Rapids, and he said, "Hey, I got your resume, and would love to talk to you about coming, and I have this media relations part-time position open. Would you like to take it? Would you like to interview for it?" And that kind of began my journey in Major League Soccer. I worked for the Rapids for 3 years, worked my way up from a media relations part-time person to being the interim director, and had just kind of realized at one point I didn't want to live life in a stadium every weekend. I was soon to be married, so I realized the pressure of being on the road, being at home. I just didn't want that. And a few months later, they hired someone else for that role, and I actually left the team. I left the Rapids, and the day I left the Rapids, I put in an application at Denver Seminary. Had felt God putting a call on my heart, and the way that kind of worked out was in early 2001, I was walking out on the field with a player, and it was one of those moments, Phil, when I learned enough about the team. Like, you don't just put yourself out there because you open yourself up to banter and all sorts of things.
Yep.
And he asked me this sort of larger than life question, and he's like, "Hey, are you and your fiance, are you guys living together?" And I just thought, "Oh man, I do not want to go down this road. I don't want to to this guy about this." And but I felt this nudge from the Lord saying, "Tell him about me. Tell him about me." And I was like, I'd tell now, like, I look up and I'm arguing with God, like, no, I'm not going to tell this guy about like, my life and these things, these private details. But it was a moment now that I know was kind of like a moment of flow where everything slowed down. There was like this light from heaven, this cone around us, and just felt this prompting and had this conversation with him, and got to this point where I just said, "Hey," he's like, "Aren't you afraid of, like, all these things could go wrong? You should live together so you try each other out." And I just was able to share with him, like, "No, my faith tells me I don't have to be afraid, that I believe that God has her for me and me for her, and the rest of the details we might fight and wrestle and struggle through, but God will be with us in the midst of that." And I got back to my hotel room that night, and I said, "Lord, I don't know what that was, but I would love to do more of that. I just love to be with people." So I get into seminary a couple months later. 9/11 was my first day of seminary, just to give a frame of reference. It was amazing. I thought the world was over, and I had just spent all this money to go to school, but God did some things through that, and a few months later, I ran into the head coach at a restaurant of the Rapids, and he said, "What are you doing now?" I said, "Well, I'm at seminary." And he's like, "Oh, maybe you could come help our chaplain." And I thought, "Chaplain? Like, you guys have a chaplain?" Like, I didn't even know what that was, really. And had a conversation with this guy. He was the son of the Dallas Cowboys had a chaplain from Athletes in Action, and he was living here in Colorado, and he had been with the team for, I don't know, 6 months. And so we had this conversation. He's like, "Brad, this would be great. You know some of the people on the team, and I'd love to have you help out. And kind of here's my ideas." And we had this long chat. A couple weeks later, though, he called me and said, "Brad, our family's having a baby girl being born. She's going to have some special needs. We're going to move closer to be with family. So good luck." I was like, "Good luck? Like, what does good luck mean?" But that was really God opening the door. So in 2002, I went back to the team as volunteer chaplain, and I've been in that role ever since. As soon as that kind of became official, I changed my seminary degree to chaplaincy, um, and I just really started to say, how do I do this? How do I do this in this space? And, yeah, it's been the longest running thing I've ever done. I've done some other things in the midst of that. I was a hospice chaplain for 4 years. That's kinda where I earned my income. I was on staff at a large mega church here in Denver in pastoral care for about 6 years. But for the last 10 years, I've been raising funds to do the work that I do. And in 2015, so yeah, literally going on 10 years, God said, "In addition to the Rapids, what I want you to do is grow up other chaplains." And by then, I think I've been around the league maybe 10, 15 years. So it's a very transient nomadic culture. So people move everywhere. And I had served some people really well and was still serving them, loving them, caring for them. And it just started to create opportunities to go seek other chaplains, other people like myself who maybe they were a vocational pastor and they had 10, 15 hours a week to kind of give to this other work. And so in 2015, that really became the new burden and new vision was to grow chaplaincy, not just grow it for the Rapids, but grow it throughout soccer as God would allow. And that's kind of there's iterations of the story and the way I tell it, but that's kind of where we get to today.
No, I love that. I love that. And we'll get more into the chaplain role and what you're doing and what that looks like and some great stories from that, which I no doubt you have. You already shared one of those. What a cool opportunity. And just even for confirmation for you as well. Like that's so cool. Because no doubt it had an impact on the other side as well. There's always another side of the story, right? But we won't get that today, unfortunately. And that would be really cool if I said, "Hey, Brad, look who we have." Who can, but we don't have that today. But what is your personal why? Your kind of your purpose, and how are you living that out? I imagine I know how you're living it out, but love to hear that, from you and just, why you do what you do.
Yeah, I think, even in the early days of starting the work, I said, I've got to have a framework for why I'm working with pro athletes. So in the beginning, 1 Timothy 4:8 became part of that guardrail or guideline for me. Um, and that became important as I worked in hospice as well. 1 Timothy 4:8 says, physical training is of some value, but godliness or spiritual training has value for this life and the life to come. And I thought, a lot of the athletes that I'm working with, that I'm seeing, the coaches, there's a strong emphasis on the physical. Nowadays, I might even say that there's a stronger emphasis on the mental, so the physical and the mental, but the spiritual often is neglected. And so I thought the thing that I can bring is I can bring that encouragement to cultivating, nurturing the spiritual. A lot of people ask me, they'll, "Hey, Rev's my nickname. Rev, do you kick around with the guys?" And I I laugh because no, they don't need me to kick around with them. They do well on their own, and we play some games when I'm out there sometimes. But I the thing that I bring isn't about the physical. It's not about even the mental. It's really about the spiritual, and sometimes that mental, spiritual, emotional kind of overlaps. But that became for me the beginning of the work that I did as a chaplain. But I think more importantly, Phil, or what I realized, what I came to realize a few years into seminary was the story of Saint Martin. So from St. Martin's story, St. Martin of Tours, we get the word for chapel and chaplaincy. And the story of St. Martin as it goes, he was a Roman soldier and headed into the city of Amiens, France. And he sees a beggar on the side of the road, and he cuts his Roman centurion cloak in half and covers a man to kind of cover him from the cold. Goes in that night, has a dream, and Jesus is in the dream. talking to the angels, and Martin notices that Jesus has the cut part of the cloak around him, and he says, Martin's not even baptized, and he's covered me with his cloak. And it's a reminder of Matthew 25, which talks about, we're to care for people that are in need. And in that moment, I realized that that moment of walking out with the athlete out on the field was a moment of simply covering that athlete. It was the Lord saying, hey, tell him about me. Tell him about how your faith in me lets you live without fear, lets you live with a certain kind of confidence. I mean, he had confidence that the guy had played in the Bundesliga. He traveled the world, but I knew this because I knew his story. He didn't have a father figure. He didn't have a person who would probably talk to him and be authentic about faith or life or any of these other things. It's just a mix of pro sports. You're always trying to prove yourself and prove your worth. And so I look at that St. Martin story, and I've had to wrestle with for years, like, God, am I in the right space? I mean, most of my seminarian fellows and colleagues are pastoring a church. Like, what am I doing? And sometimes I wrestle with that, but I go back to St. Martin's story, and I've even had to go and say, yeah, but where does St. Martin's story, like, it can't just be that story. And so I go all the way back to Genesis 3 when God encounters the first parents in the garden. And in their vulnerability, in their shame, in their hiding, he makes the first sacrifice. He kills the animal. He makes skins, garments of skin to cover them so that they can go through life and survive. And so I've just looked at the story of St. Martin, and there's other covering stories in scripture, but I go back to Genesis 3 and go, this is part of what God's called me to do, is that in as much as I can, walk alongside of people to call out to them, hey, where are you? To find them. And in the point of their need, however best I can, to try to cover them and provide them a covering. So that's kind of my why, how I live out in it. And I've told some friends recently, I said, I've done this so long in the pro sport place in soccer. I just can't imagine God having me go do anything else at this point. I think I'd have to learn a whole new language. I don't know that I could do it.
It's funny you say that. I've had similar conversations in ministry. People are like, what would you do? I'm like, I don't know. I was an attorney for 8 years, but I wouldn't go back and do that. I don't think that would, my brother's like, that would be miserable. Like, yeah, it probably would be for me. But that reminds me of, when you talked about that, where the athletes are continually trying to prove themselves. And that's the side of it we don't see, right? Most of the time, you don't see that. You kind of see it, I guess, a little bit with now social media, but most of the time it's just they're out there. What a life! What an amazing thing! And it's gonna, But then talking to Graham Daniels, when I was able to have that interview with him, and the achieved identity versus received identity, and that most people have that achieved identity, right? And especially when their worldview is not a Christian worldview. When you have a Christian worldview, you have a received identity, right? But how do you navigate that with, you talking about having players from all over the world, right? I mean, the MLS now has players from everywhere. And with that comes different cultures, different worldviews, different religions, different everything, right? I mean, literally, you and I have interacted with enough people from around the world to know that people are people on one hand. And on the other hand, people's lives are so different just based on where you're born, and the worldviews are so different based on where you're born and what you're raised as, and not having a father, not having a mother, having a mother, like these different things. So how do you navigate that as a chaplain, especially when I'm assuming based on what I've read, you're a chaplain, not just a Christian chaplain, but you're a chaplain to provide spiritual. Obviously, you are a Christian who's a chaplain, but to provide that spiritual direction. How do you navigate all that? And what does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I think sometimes it's hard for people to say, how do you balance those things? So as a Christian person, there's things that are very easy for me to do, to pray, lead a Bible study, to walk someone through the Bible. It becomes more challenging when someone doesn't have a similar faith tradition as my own, or any faith tradition. So sometimes it's a work of trying to find that common ground. Trying for them as I think in some of the work I do, maybe, spiritual direction's a term that might be familiar for some, but or coaching, life coaching, you get into some of those things, but there's this sort of this work to say, what are some of the resources you have in your life? Let's talk about your family. Let's talk about your experiences. Let's talk about the other ways. And then sometimes there's an opportunity to say, where does God and faith fit into all this for you? And oftentimes people have some brush with faith. It could be a grandparent or someone else in their family tree that exhibited something of faith that stands out to them as an example. And sometimes some of the fun stuff I get to do is I get to translate and paraphrase scripture and the stories of scripture into a way of um, giving them a new resource that they could consider for the thing that they're going through. But let me share one quick story. So we had a Muslim athlete, and I knew he was Muslim, and as a way of support, I went to him and I said, "Are you going to observe the fast of Ramadan?" Now, Ramadan in August in Colorado, High Plains Desert, is not an ideal time to not drink water throughout the day, throughout training sessions. And he said, Yes, I'm going to observe, but I'm not going to tell the team." And I said, "Why?" And he goes, I don't want the coach to bench me. I think he'd been our number two keeper, and he had just gotten into the first position, but he didn't want the coach to bench him. So he was going to try and conceal. And I said, how about this, friend? How about, do you mind if I go? With your permission, I will go. Can I advocate for you? And with the training staff and with the coaching staff, can we come up with a plan so you can observe what you can or do what you can? And so I said, yeah, you have my permission. So I talked to the athletic training staff first. I said, what can we do? And they said, we could probably develop a hydration nutrition plan for him. And then I went to the coaches, and sure enough, their first reaction was, what? Oh, we got to bench him. There's no way that he can do this. But I was there now with the athletic trainer, and we said, no, we've developed this plan. We think that we can support him. He'll do fine. And then I said, I've done some looking into this, and he can actually get an allowance from his religious leader, and he can make up the fast in the off season for the days that he absolutely can't miss. And we can monitor it. And so we came up with a solution. And I felt I should really have the stats of how well we did during that time. August always seems to see a dip here for Rapids, usually in our history, but I think we did okay. And he started like every game. He did okay. I don't think he was injured, but at the end of it, we got together for a meal. He said, "Why'd you do this? Why'd you advocate for me?" And I said, "And I love you. I love you. I care about you." And he says, "Yeah, well, why though?" And I said, "Well, this is part of Jesus in my life." He goes, "Well, tell me about Jesus, because I know Jesus too." And so it was just over a meal. We shared about what we knew about Jesus, and he shared his view and how he understood Jesus to be, and sort of the Muslim idea of Jesus. And I shared with him, like, this is the relational Jesus that I know. Who knows? Seed planted, or how God may use that for some other day. But I look at that, and I look at the fact that I just simply cared for this guy, and I tried to love him as best as I knew. And I think that added in something, and that helped. And so as I work with athletes, many of them come in with this performance related identity. And it's not a thing as a chaplain that it's not like I'm a coach there and I just directly talk into people's lives. I have to walk alongside of them through sometimes a tragedy, or through a low point, or even through a plateau. A lot of guys hit this plateau. And so sometimes for me, part of my idea is, can I journey with someone enough wherever they begin in the identity space? And can I help them move? Can I help them move at all? Can I help them move from a sense of performance-driven identity into purpose identity? And even I think there's a third level, or another higher level in which someone could even understand that they are called. And a calling is, I think, higher than purpose. I mean, yeah, I see a lot of athletes play with purpose. They go out and they say, "For my family members, for my village, my community, I need to achieve and arrive and do my best," and then send back the gifts, of the game and support my family and my community. That's a noble purpose. But even at the end of the day, that's not enough. And so to understand a calling, I think, is so much more helpful for athletes. I've got a former athlete who for years wrestled with, uh, once he was done with the game, if he should coach. And he loved to coach. He loved to invest into people, but he had some words from family members and friends that were always in the back of his mind. And that was, it's a game. It's a game. And so that sort of diminutive way of talking to him, demeaning way, he always questioned, but I feel that I'm called to coach. And so for years, and sometimes I'll get a call with him even now, and he'll be like, "Am I really supposed to do this? Because I love what I do, and it is a game." And we process it again. No, there's a calling here, and you're doing more than just X's and O's and moving people about on the pitch. You are investing into people's lives and investing into the staff, your staff members' lives. You're doing more. There's purpose, but you're called to do this. You've been equipped. And so for me, really the identity conversation is so many young guys begin with this sort of sense of achievement or performance driven identity. And I just see walking alongside of them, how can I help them see purpose and calling as part of their life? And if that includes football, if that includes soccer, great. If it's separate from soccer, great. I think that's one of the beauties of someone who lives in the space of I've touched the pro space as a worker, as a staff member, not necessarily as an athlete, but I think that helps give me, and even in my role today as a volunteer, uh, with the team, I have an outside perspective. I'm not driven by the club to keep. I'll tell another story. The academy uh, for the team had they asked, hey, can we put together some educational units for our kids? Say, I'd love to be part of this. And so we put together a panel, and I brought in a former academy standout that had won a homegrown contract. I brought in a guy that had gone through the college pathway, and then one of the other homegrowns that had kind of gone through a little bit of college. And so all three of them talked about their own experience and how they experienced it. And a lot of guys were like, go to school, get the education. And now I don't know how the some of the club higher ups at the time felt about that, but the message was about be a whole person. And a lot of my work as a chaplain is how can I help you be whole? And we've had coaches and managers throughout our time at the club and elsewhere as I deal with as I coach our other chaplains. There's been a lot of dysfunction and difficulty in soccer. And as we coach people to and we help them understand that they are a whole person, they're more than just a footballer, they're more than just a football manager or coach. There's more to them, and let us help you discover what some of those things are. So we work with some tools, and we walk alongside of people. We share with them from our own faith, tradition, and experience, and that's the beautiful part of our work. It's a tough work because we don't really put it out there. We have a few people that are like, "I just absolutely love what you've done in my life, and I gotta tell others." That's great, but we don't do it for those kudos. We just do it to see people be whole and healthy.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. And even as you're talking through that, like I said, I keep going back to that Graham Daniels episode. It is the most like I've recommended that to more people than anybody. I don't know if you've ever heard that one, but he talks about this idea of, when you're playing for that performance and that identity of achieved identity, you're scared to survive. And I'd say even with that purpose, if their purpose is to play for their family or other people, they're still playing scared to survive, right? And if you don't have that calling, that received identity, this is what I'm supposed to do, this is what I'm made to do, this is what I'm called to do. He says you'll never be safe to serve, which is what we should, when you're playing like that, you play free, and you see players that play because they know it's what they're supposed to do. You see people doing what they're doing. You talk about the flow, you talk about that. It's hard to get into that when you're playing scared to survive. And so, no, I love that. Anything to add with that?
Well, first, I love Graham Daniels. We've spent a bit of time together as I've gone over when I was beginning
Yeah.
the work in 2003, 4, 5. I said, there's in the U.S. Athletes in Action or the pioneer group. They've done a lot in the space.
Mhm.
But I said it's kind of my attitude is like there's got to be someone else that's done this and for longer and they're older. So John Boyers, Rev. John Boyers was a Manchester United chaplain, and he led what at the time was called SCORE. Today it's Sports Chaplains UK, and he said, come over. We'll go to a game." So I am a United fan.
Nice. Yeah.
We've been going through a desert right now,
Yep.
um, but John kind of took me under his wing. I would go to him. I'd ask these questions like, how do you work in this culture that's resistant to faith, to Christianity? And so we'd have these intimate conversations. I kind of see him as a Paul to me, kind of like a forerunner who's kind of as a Timothy, maybe taking me under his wing a little bit as it's possible. And Graham's been one of those people as well who he's been an emerging voice for me because of his story as a footballer who came to faith as a pro footballer.
Yeah.
And some of his work now, and so Andy Parker and Graham Daniels, some of these guys, we've spent time together at some of these conferences, and I've just enjoyed working with these men and hearing their stories. And Graham was so gracious to give a little endorsement on my book not too long ago, and I just appreciate his story really uniquely. But I think too, as Graham lives that out, and as other soccer players live out this life where, and coaches too, I should say, as they live out this life where their identity, when you're in it long enough, and I'm worried about this for myself, Phil. Next year will be 25 years as volunteer chaplain. It's often my leader. I often go, I'm the volunteer chaplain with the Rapids. And that gets people's attention. Other things that I say identity-wise don't really move the needle for people to have a conversation with me. And so I know at some point I'll have to lay that aside, give it to someone else, train and raise up someone else to take that role. How will my handoff go? Because I've seen others of a previous generation, pastors and leaders, struggle with the handoff. They don't want to let go. And whether it's power or identity or comfortability or other things, it's so hard sometimes, I think, when we get to that point. And I just pray for myself that God help me lay it down when I need to and give it to someone else. And I think we're better served when those things happen, because when we don't, there can be a gap. There can be, I mean, not to pick on Manchester United, but Sir Alex, when he stepped aside, and poor David didn't get enough time, I think. And then it's just been one coach after another, and who really fits the culture and like to understand all those things, it takes a lot. And so I think as we think through leadership models, as we think through ways that we engage whatever industry, whatever space we're in, if we can think with the mentality of I'm a steward rather than I'm the principal. I hate my title of executive director because I'm really poor at being an executive director. I'm visionary. I'm administrative enough to be dangerous, but I bet you someone could come in and lead my organization so much better.
Yeah.
Now, can they have the heart behind it? Can they have the culture, the ethos? Okay, we can talk about that. But I'm just a steward, and I hope someday that someone comes along and stewards what has begun with Soccer Chaplains United into a next level, into a next phase.
Yeah, that's a lot of great stuff in there. I too am a suffering Manchester United supporter, and my son actually is. I've strongly encouraged my children to also take up the reign of Manchester United, and they all have, fortunately, because I don't know what I'd do with them if they didn't. But my 13-year-old has asked a few years ago. He says, "Was United ever really good?" And so I had to show him the '99 Barcelona, Champions League final, and we watched the whole game on YouTube, which was the first time I'd ever done that. That was actually a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Why are you showing this to me? They're stinking this place up." And I was like, "Yeah, they did for about 90 minutes." And then, so, but I should get you back on. We could just do the leadership and spiritual lessons of the Man United wilderness journey, since Alex Ferguson, but we're not going to do that today. I actually thought through that when I saw you're a United supporter, but that'd be a fun conversation.
Yeah.
But we're not gonna go deeper into that because I think we'd both be depressed at the end of the whole thing. But actually, this podcast, little known fact, this podcast started as a podcast that was going to be, just talking about United and the leadership stuff that was kind of coming out of that, and then it morphed into something else. I'd probably get a lot more listeners if I did that, but I felt that what we did is for more of that purpose and calling side of things. So all that to say, that was something that I see your scarf up there. I think I have that same scarf, and it's gonna come back. You got to have faith. You have faith. I'm not sure Amarim's the guy, but we will. Time will tell, I guess, on that. Let's go into kind of your, as you said, self-proclaimed brief. And, I don't know if it was storied. I'm sure there's some stories in it, soccer career. But what was a defining moment from actual playing days? Like when you played and, you talked about an injury, you talked about some other things, but what was a defining moment? Why was it impactful? And what did you, what were some life lessons you learned from that?
Yeah, I think for me, again, playing in high school, and I played in a day, so I spent a significant portion of my childhood in Michigan, and so in Michigan, American football was God, and so most of the boys would play soccer, uh, if they were sort of the American football rejects, or if my school didn't have American football, so soccer became the place where all the basketball stars would go to get fitness, and um, I just remember a couple things from my experience in high school soccer. One is the coaches were dads who I don't think they got paid anything, and to not get paid and go sit out with a bunch of teenage boys who really aren't listening was something, and I look at that now and I go, "What a sacrifice they made," and maybe one or two of them had a son on the team, and so there was a motivation, there was maybe a purpose to share, but, that idea of sacrifice was something that was important to me, or something that I took away from it. Um, I think too, another lesson that was kinda learned was, you know, I was on the bottom rung at times with the team, and, you develop a camaraderie when you're at the bottom of something, as you develop a camaraderie when you're at the top or in the middle, but I remember that there were a couple other guys kind of in my position, and, we were almost like the three amigos, but we were out there with heart and in different moments when we got an opportunity, uh differently than and this was, like, in my freshman and sophomore years. In those different years when we got opportunity, even even the guys who maybe we aspired to be cheered us on, and they were excited for us when we had moments of opportunity. And so, I think you realize differently, and I've seen this in the work I've done. I've done some, chaplaincy work with a local high school team, in addition to the academy. And the academy's different. You're competing for a spot. You're competing for a contract ultimately. But in high school, you can have more of a team brotherhood. And I think that brotherhood on the team was something that was memorable for me and something that I took away and that I took as I moved from Michigan to Colorado in my senior year. It was something I took into as the coach in Colorado now tabbed me as a senior to lead others was, how do I develop bonds of brotherhood amongst the team? And even as I became injured just a few games into the season, um, how do I continue to facilitate that brotherhood as best as I can? And so I think those were some memorable things. The knee injury, of course, was uh, pivotal. It was a bruised knee. It wasn't. I didn't do an ACL or anything like that, but it was the end. And
Mhm.
I look back now, would I have done anything differently had I have known that was the end of the competitive playing days? And, we know what we know, and, I don't think it would be fair to expect me to do anything different, but I think even had I have realized that was the end, maybe wish I would have soaked something up differently, like,
Mm.
been more present to a moment. I don't remember exactly the end of our soccer season that year. We were a first-year program, um, and I had come to a small 3A school here in Colorado. It was the school's first year of soccer, so I don't think it was anything impressive, but part of me wishes I remembered better, moments or the end so that I could have taken that in. I do remember a few games crutching around the sidelines, to encourage the team, but I don't remember much else, and I wish I had been more present to that moment, and I think those were some
Mm.
of the defining spaces for me, just out of my playing days.
Yeah. No, that's so good, and I think of that same 13-year-old, he played tackle football this year, and he's used to being the guy, in soccer, and, you put him in a football, tackle football with the high school here is one of the best teams in California, and he didn't play at all,
Mm,
I mean, they quote unquote redshirted him, which meant they didn't have to play him any downs. Normally at youth football, you have to play some. And he was kinda like hemming and hawing, and I said, "You committed to this team, you're part of this team. Even if you don't play a single down all year, you're part of this team. Um, what can you learn from it?" And at the end of the year, every people would ask him, "How'd you like football?" And it's, I didn't," you know? But I have no doubt it's helped him with empathy for his teammates on soccer, and it's helped him understand the kids at school who aren't the guys, and he can now understand those things at a level he never would have been able to if it's just theory, right? And so I think that's those are the lessons from the game, and as you're now chaplain, like, you can talk to guys on the bench in a way. Obviously, it's very different, but it still has some sort of, connection point, and so I love that. I love that. That's why I love that question, because most of the time that question is not answered with, "Oh, it's when I hit the banger to win the championship in high school, or in college, or in the." And it's something that's teaching some other life lesson that you don't even realize. You definitely don't realize in the moment, but looking back, it's like, thank you, Lord, for giving me that. So with that, let's transition into the Soccer Psalms. This book that you have just released in December, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. And so, can you just, what inspired you to write it, and what do you hope people will do, and how will they act after reading it and while reading it?
Yeah, so I started in 2005. I had written my first soccer psalm, as it were, and, what I used to do back in the day is I would write every week, I would write a one-pager, and it was sometimes an inspirational thought, or sometimes I'd grab onto, like the Super Bowl was the other day, and so I might say something culturally relevant about an event that was going on and kinda give an insight into it. So in 2005, I had written this, note to some of the guys, left it in everyone's locker. That was my habit, was like, "Hey, if you wanna trash it, that's fine, but I'm gonna leave it for everyone," and it wasn't overtly, proselytizing or evangelistic. It was just sometimes a thread of something, and so, I had written this soccer psalm, and I had taken Psalm 23, and I had written it for a footballer or for a soccer player and kinda in that language, and so, um as I did that throughout the years, I would use that soccer psalm every once in a while as I saw different players come in or felt like I needed a writing piece, I would encourage a sort of reflective, like, how do we translate the Bible into where we're at, what we're doing now? And so a couple of years ago, I had kind of built up, and I'd always thought, oh, maybe I'll create more of these soccer psalms. And so I'd written two or three, maybe four or five. I'd gotten somewhere, and they were dusty in some file folder on the computer, but a couple years ago, I just thought, man, I need to go for this. I need to just create this book, the Soccer Psalms. And so I just took on, at that point, I think I had maybe amassed 10 different psalms that I had translated for soccer. And I had seen in some of the psalms that there's different language here that, yeah, reminds me of maybe what the fans would do, or this reminds me of maybe how I felt as a staff member at Rapids. This reminds me of a head coach. I had one coach, a good friend of mine, he said Psalm 91 had become really important for him over the years. And so I go, oh, that's got to be one that I translate. If it's important for him, let me translate Psalm 91. And so I start out year and a half ago or so, and I was like, all 150. I'm going to translate all 150 Psalms. And so I was looking at how do I organize that, though, because there's copyright rules around the Bible and quotations and stuff. So I thought, how do I keep it under 500 verses so that I don't have to like go get permission, because that'll take time, and who am I? No one's going to give me permission. So, but a good friend said, Brad, just do a few Psalms. You don't have to do them all. So once he gave me permission, I landed. I said, okay, let me land with, I think I had written 32, 33 Psalms. And another buddy came in and said, bro, there's 31 days in a month, just go 31. So, so now the structure, the format's coming, but really, Phil, the whole purpose behind the book is to get people into God's word, and to get people to realize that the Bible speaks even to our everyday experience. And as I translate or paraphrase it, as it may be, I wanted people to realize that God's word says that, or I could apply God's word in that way and in that understanding. And so as I did the physical copy of the book, I made sure that I had the biblical psalm on one side of the page and then my paraphrase on the other, so that someone could literally look down, read it, and then look over and go back and forth and be like, oh, I see why that's that. And again, I think even in review, I was sharing about Psalm 1 the other day, and I'll just quickly flip there. Psalm 1:4 says, not so the wicked, they're like chaff that the wind blows away. I translated, paraphrased it in the soccer psalm, not so the reckless player, they're like a mannequin, which is only worthwhile for standing still on the pitch. And I was telling some of my coach friends, I said, that idea of the mannequin feels worthless, but really what I should have done is talked about the reckless player who just goes all over the field and doesn't play according to the philosophy or the game plan, and ignores his teammates and just does what he wants to do. So in some of the I'll do a revised version, I'm sure someday. But more so than a mannequin, I may pick up that idea of sort of the blowing around, going wherever you want idea. But I just really wanted to make, for the athletes and for the coaches, for a lot of people who don't read the Bible, to create language in a way of situating them closer to something that might appeal to them, and then they get into God's word a little bit deeper. Yeah, that's really the primary motivation for what I'm doing.
I love it. And I haven't read the whole thing, but definitely have read a few of them and listened to a couple of podcasts that you've done on them. But is there maybe one or two, kind of shorter ones, or it could be a longer one, that you can share and just kind of give people an idea? You gave a little idea there on verse 1:4, but just share one and we can kind of just enjoy it.
Yeah, let me, Psalm 133 is pretty short.
Yeah.
I just labeled this a victory song. So the Psalm 133 from the scripture, it's a song of ascent. So people would say this going up to the temple, and David likely wrote it. How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. It is as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion, for there the Lord bestows his blessing, even life forevermore. And then the soccer psalm, how I paraphrased it as a song after a victory, whether it was small or large. How good and amazing it is when the team is unified, playing together as one. It's like a champagne shower after a cup final win, like a Gatorade bath splashed over the head, covering the team coach from head to toe, and everyone else that's part of the team. It's like a light rain or sprinkling falling on the pitch, making the home match play more to our favor. It's in these moments we feel so blessed by God, and no one ever wants to leave the team or ever forget it. I translated that one based on really 2010 and the Rapids as we won the MLS Cup final. What a neat and amazing experience to be invited into. My wife and I had just had twin daughters born, and I remember we had beat, I think it was San Jose in the Eastern Conference final. So to the mystery of MLS sometimes, but he had won the Eastern Conference, and we were going to MLS Cup. And I remember walking in that night, and it was dark. She was laying on the couch just resting. She could hear the smile on my face, though, and she goes, "What is it?" And I said, "Well, the team have invited me to go to Toronto for the week leading up to MLS Cup." She goes, "You have to go." I was like, at that point, I knew my wife was a saint, because just having twin daughters born, I mean, they were literally 3-4 months old, and having two other younger ones in the house, and she said, "Go, do it." So what a neat experience to kind of travel and be with the team throughout that week. And there have been things that had gone on throughout the week, and I think we were the underdogs. I don't know, but when you open up the match day program and your head coach has the name is Jason Kreis, head coach, you realize that someone in the PR department had forgot to double check everything. And last year's program they had really copied and pasted into the 2010 program. And so there was all these little dings. We won the Eastern Conference, even though we're in the West. And there was just a sense of, who are the Rapids? And we got to this point of winning. And some of my favorite memories were, celebrating, the guys celebrating on the field and in the locker room afterwards. They're just showering each other with the champagne. But there was a moment when we're seated at dinner at this banquet, kind of a couple nights before the game, and everyone's head was low. There was one of the guys, starter, had found out he wasn't starting for the final, and he was kicking guys in training and just being real difficult. The coach called me in. He said, "I don't know, Rev, what do you think? Should I send this guy home?" And he was there with his other coaches, and they were literally thinking of putting this guy on a plane. But they didn't, and he didn't play, but I think he ended up coming on, and a couple of the other guys came on and had these influential moments in the game. But we're there at the dinner that night, and everyone's low. And the coach says, "Hey, Rev, I was going to ask you to maybe say a little prayer or a blessing before we eat." But we had all been eating for about 10 minutes already, so it was like, we missed maybe a moment. And I said, "Coach, are you sure?" And I remember going up to the captain, Pablo Mastroeni at the time, and I go, "Hey, do you want to say some words to the team?" He's like, "Rev, that's your deal. That's not mine. I don't do those things in that moment." And so, I just stood up in a moment, and I forget everything that I said or exactly how I said it, but I kind of raised my glass in a toast and said, on nights like these, way back in a time, like, men have gathered around a table like this and shared a meal together before the night of their most difficult challenge or their ultimate conquest. They've shared a meal, they've shared stories, and they've remembered who they are. And so, I made references. The Christian guys knew exactly what I was talking about.
Yeah.
I think the other guys were thinking like, "Oh, this is like Beowulf or some other like English."
Les Miserables.
Yeah.
The French Revolution. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, but as I toasted, I said, a toast to our brotherhood, to our fellowship, to our communion, to our community. And then all of a sudden, guys started sharing stories, and laughter broke out. And it was almost like one of the coaches came up to me afterwards, after we'd won the game. He's like, "Oh, Rev, if you don't do that night, I don't think we win." And I think
Mm.
it's me too much credit, but the truth was that there was a heaviness on the whole team, and it broke. And as guys broke and were free, as they were lighter and lifted, I think the way they went into that game was so different, and it was just amazing to be part of it, and yeah, I really enjoyed that. That's one of the highlights. 2010, I say, is one of my most special years. Twins born, win MLS Cup, may never happen again. So, thank you, God.
That likely will never happen again.
Yeah.
I know you're similar age to me, so if it does, God really wants it to happen. So, that was the year Wells was on that team too?
Yes.
Or yeah. So we just had him on. So that was he mentioned you, and so that was it's all coming together, folks. We don't always tie the podcast together like that, but that's there it is. Now that's awesome. I love that. I love that psalm. That's one of my favorite psalms, and actually I preached on it several years ago. We did all the Psalms of Ascent, and so that's just the unity and team, and I love what you did with that one. That's so cool. That's so cool.
Yeah,
Um,
the other one that was really challenging was Psalm 137, has this line at the end, in the Bible. It says, "Happy is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks." And, I was like, "Lord, I don't know
How
how
do
to
I do it this
translate
way?
that." So this is where I landed with it, Phil, is I said, "Blessed is the club that steals your academy athletes.
Uh,
Blessed are those who put an end to your corruption and your tainting of the beautiful game." I just thought, at least let them steal the academy athletes. I don't know about dashing on the rocks, but
yeah. You kind of maybe leave that out of the soccer psalms. Maybe God will give you some revelation before the revised edition,
yeah,
before the new soccer psalms version.
yeah,
We're gonna have something there. I just thought about how the new rules with the academy players being, full value and losing the one of the best things about the game where the homegrowns, as you're talking about, are playing. It's a sad day. I think there's so much that bums me out about the current game from youth to pro that you lose some of the magic, I think.
yeah.
I was just reading an article about the not having the FA Cup replay loses the magic of these teams that are, pulling out a draw and then don't get the reward of playing at I think it was the Tottenham match, and they didn't get to go to play at Tottenham Stadium. And like, that was always those little guys were like, yes, we get to go play at Old Trafford, and we get to go play it, wherever, Craven Cottage or whatever it was. But anyway, man, I'd love to go through the whole book, but we're not going to do that because I want people to buy the book. Where can they find it? Is it just on Amazon, right? You can
Yeah,
find it
on
there or somewhere
Amazon.
else.
On Amazon, there's you could buy paperback, hardback. There's an ebook version. I've been in the month of January, been translating it into Spanish. So
Awesome.
there's actually 3 books, or will be 3 books. The Soccer Psalms is kind of soccer. In the UK, although you could get it here, it's the football Psalms. So I anglicized everything just so our friends like Graham Daniels could actually
Understand it.
palate it. It could be
You
palatable.
have S's where there's, Z's, and you
Exactly,
have the
exactly.
extra
All
U
that.
and the whole deal. The whole
It's not a
deal.
coach, it's a manager, all that.
Yeah. Yes.
Ted Lasso. No.
Do you use maths? Do you say maths anywhere? Do you have that in there
I
anywhere?
don't know that I use that.
Okay. Probably not. I mean, there's probably not math, but that's
Yeah,
always
but,
one of my favorites.
oh, no, I may have meds in there. Yeah. I
Yeah.
use the bin. There's one
Nice.
people don't tailgate in the UK, so what do?
Yeah.
They go for chippies, so
Okay.
I had to talk
Nice.
about fish and chippies, and, yeah, so there's some of those phrases have been changed, and then just still working on it in a Spanish translation version. That'll hopefully come out in a month or 2. But yeah, just really, again, the point is, can I get people back into God's word?
Yeah. I love it. I love it. I'm so glad you did that. Grateful for you. We got a couple more questions we ask everybody. And the first of those is, how have you used the lessons you've learned directly from the game of soccer in your marriage and parenting?
Ooh, that's a good question. I joke that, in the last few years, as I have introduced myself as a volunteer chaplain to academy, or to athletes, I tell about my 4 daughters, and I say, "Don't tell the academy boys that I have 4 girls." Um, but, joking aside, I think that, there's different lessons that I've, again, kind of translated into, ways that I may coach or speak to a parent or into someone who's, looking for counseling, premarital counseling or marriage counseling. Um, for example, I talk about a stretcher crew. I ask people, "Who's on your stretcher crew?" And I say, "When you're down, when you're injured, who are the 4 people that are gonna come alongside you and lift you and take you off the pitch, take you out of the field, take you out of the field of play, and mend you, take care of you?" And so I have people name 4 people, that they can call when they fall down, when they get hurt, when they break. I'll ask, athletes sometimes I say, "Who's in your starting 11?" Or a coach, "Who's in your starting 11?" Name them. They can be dead too. C.S. Lewis is in my starting 11. He's one of the people I'm reading. He's one of the people that's influencing, my work as a chaplain, my work as a husband, a father, all those things, as a friend. Who's in your starting 11? It could be a parent, it could be a coach. Who are those people that and I even play with it a little bit and say, um, give me a formation, give me a lineup. Like, who are your wingers? Who's running alongside of you as you go through this moment in life? And so, athlete transition is a big part of the game these days. Even though there's more resources towards it, I still don't think we're doing it very well, in terms of the overall picture of the game. So I'll ask athletes and coaches, like, who's your striker? Who's got your back? Who's defending goal for you? And so some of those lessons I've just kind of translated in. The stretcher crew, I relate into the friends that bring, the paralyzed man to Jesus in Mark. I think it's Mark 2. Who are these people that are gonna, when you can't go, they're gonna carry you? And so those are some of the lessons. And so I'll take different things that I see in the game and kind of translate them with scripture and life. When I watch games, I attend most home games for the Rapids. I travel a little bit too at their, as they've been gracious the past couple years. But I always try to watch games high up because I understand the game better from a higher point of view. And I see the space. I see, and I'll ask people because I still don't understand things. Why did he run there, and why didn't he run there? And sometimes I ask because I just wanna talk to them. Sometimes I ask because I really wanna know. But in that angle, it's very different from being on the field where the dimensional, sight that I have, the ability to understand what's going on in the game, it's so much quicker down on the field level than it is from up high. And so I think even too that translates into life is that I'll ask players and coaches, I say, "Who's up in the crow's nest? Who's looking down and giving you a 30,000-foot view?" Because you're here in the field of play, you're running so fast, you're trying to manage so many different things. You need that insight. You need that intel that helps you know, "Hey, the left back is pinching in. There's space there on the right side. Get into that space." You need that intel from someone else. I have a few players transitioning now that have been long time in the game, and they say, "Rev, I don't know what to do. I don't know what am supposed to do." So we start, "What do you know you're not supposed to do?" "I don't
Mm.
wanna coach kids," or whatever it is. We land on something, and then we start building out, and I go, "Well, here's what I know about you is true. Uh, 1, you're loyal. You have a strong advocacy bent. I see the way that when the years you were a captain, I've seen these traits in you." And so it's amazing when I think some of those players, all of a sudden something clicks in them and they go, "Oh, wow, Rev sees more about me than I see in myself." And maybe a family member will also see those things, but just to have those kinds of things, I think, are some of those lessons that I've translated from soccer and just my own experience of it into how do I coach and care for people in a holistic way?
No, I love that. I love that. There's so much good in there, folks. Go back, listen to that last little part. I mean, who's on your stretcher crew, who's your starting 11, the different perspectives. I mean, all of those things are so true, so good. And yeah, definitely check that out. Love it. Love it. Agree with all that. Um, all right. Last question. What have you watched, read, or listened to that has most impacted your thinking on how soccer explains life and leadership?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. I think, again, I referenced John Boyer's was really helpful in a time when I was building certain things. The Ted Lasso show was really helpful to, I think, affirm some things. I tell people who watch the show or have watched the show that the Higgins character is probably the most like the chaplain in the way that I've approached the game, as he invites the athletes into his home for that holiday meal. Uh,
Yeah.
and the way that Higgins, once he gets past all his initial stuff, he starts to care for people. Like, you start to see something in his character. And I think, I did a podcast series a couple years ago about lessons from Ted Lasso. So that was challenging me from the show, is to give a chaplain's perspective. I think there's some other books that have been helpful and influential, as I go through. There's a book called Footballing Live. So I've read a lot about what other chaplains have done around the game, to kind of influence and see, like, how can what kind of model do I bring? I think too, some of the other things that have been really helpful for me are things like Dr. Henry Cloud, um, and I can't remember his name right now.
Townsend.
Cloud and Townsend have been influential, and then there's another leadership guy that's been pretty impactful. He talks about teams. Patrick Lencioni. How could I
Yeah.
forget his name? But sometimes what I do feel is, uh, this story's public, so I'll share it. A number of years ago, our head coach was at odds with our technical director. And I regret that I waited too long, but I finally went to the club president and said, "Are you okay if I try to get these two guys to sit down and talk?" And he said, "Please, please, because no one else can." And I went to each one individually and said, "Would you be okay? Would you be okay?" And we sat down and we worked through a pathway of reconciliation. And I just think, if I had started that pathway a couple months earlier, maybe things would have been different and outcomes would have been different for both of those individuals. But the taking and translating work that we know is out there and works really well in business, in church, in other settings, translating pathways of reconciliation or leadership models or team development. One year, co-chaplain and I used the Enneagram, and we took the whole first team and the coaching staff through an Enneagram test. And then we told them, "This is how you guys line up, and this is why you're fighting with this guy. This is why you get along so well with this guy. And this guy, he is your arm around, loving everyone. This is why everybody loves this guy." And all of a sudden, there was this dawning for everyone of, "Oh, here's the tension points in my relationship. Here's why I don't like this guy." And so some of those tools have been really helpful to see a team go on and gel together sometimes, or chemistry is created, because you're putting some, what do they call it? The X factor, the people knowledge, people skills, soft
Mhm.
skills, into the hands of some people who really don't have time to develop those soft skills. They have to
Yeah.
have been learned through time. But no one goes to Arsenal, no one goes to Liverpool on a coaching tour, or does the French course. They're not learning soft skills, people skills. They're learning about football and football tactics. And so I think when we can give as chaplains, when we can give those extra things, again, towards the holistic care of a person, the fruit of it is just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We've talked a lot on the show about, the disc work that I've done with some teams, and man, that it's something that I obviously believe in, or I wouldn't teach it, but to hear the feedback and to hear the stories and to hear the, conflict and that is resolved simply by understanding and seeking to understand, right? Because that's not what we're taught growing up in the soccer world, right? Ever. You never that is they call it soft skills, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's soft." No, it's not soft. That's a whole different conversation about how that came to be, but it's a military term, right? And so it's definitely not soft. It's just they should have come up with a better term, or we should change it. But anyway, appreciate you, Brad. And real quick before and we'll have it in the show notes, but can you just share your website, the podcast that you do, and definitely love for people to check all that out as well.
Yeah, our website, soccerchaplainsunited.org. Some people spell chaplain like Charlie Chaplin. No, there's an A in there, so double check yourself. But really, our work is to grow and expand chaplaincy wherever the game would allow us. So youth clubs, pro clubs. I mean, the USL is blowing up right now. So we usually target about 10 teams a year where we want to grow chaplains. And they usually have some association affiliation. And as part of our group, we grow and work together. We collaborate together on best practices kind of thing. So that website, you'll see some of our chaplains, some of the teams that we work with there. You can get to know them a little bit. Some of our folks fundraise through us. So soccerchaplainsunited.org. The podcast I usually do a weekly podcast from the touchline. The idea is that chaplains, we're ones on the sides. We're not on the pitch. We're there on the sides. Sometimes people view us as a coach, and in some ways we do with the spiritual and life stuff that goes on. But that idea from the touchline, oftentimes we just cover topics of faith and family and football. And so the last few have been some readings from the soccer Psalms. You can find that on Amazon, and the football Psalms if you prefer the anglicized version. And if habla español, we'll have out the Spanish book out here, God willing, pretty soon.
Salmos de fútbol.
Salmos.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Brad. Folks, thanks for being a part of the conversation as we talk about. Paul will be back for our next interview. If you want to learn more about anything that Brad talked about on this show and anything that he's doing, if you want to grab a copy, the link will all be in the show notes. You can also check out Warrior Way and what Paul and Marcy are doing down there in Waco. You can go to Coaching the Bigger Game or providenceworld.com, and you can learn about some of the other things that I'm doing. So with all that, folks, hope that you're taking what you're learning from this show and you're using it to help you to be a better parent, a better spouse, a better friend, a better leader, better coach, better in everything that you do. And continually remind yourself that soccer does explain life and leadership. Thanks a lot. Have a great couple weeks.